Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm here today to show you how I made a little miniature cat sitting on a rug. And if you watched my previous video, you'll know that I'm making a scene from a little witch's cottage, hopefully to be ready in time for Halloween. So I've still got a few weeks to go yet. But today we're working on making a little cat, and to make this I'll be using wool roving and also wool felt and some yarn for the rug. So just quickly before we start, I thought I'd show you some of the things that I use. So if you've done needle felting before, then you will know all about this. But in case it's new for you, there's a few things that you will need. First up, this is a foam block, and this is what you use to put the roving on top, and then you'll be stabbing it into there. And you use this very sharp needle. So basically the roving goes on top and you'll be stabbing at it, and that's what makes the fibers stick together and make the shape of what you're making. So I live in Australia, so I have included in the notes some places where I've ordered my materials from before, which are all great. But of course, on Etsy, you'll be able to get these from probably just about anywhere. So yes, so we've got the foam block and the needle, and the actual wool roving looks like this, sort of like balls of fluff. It does have to be real wool, otherwise it won't work. So I've heard, I've never tried anything else, but from what I've heard, that's what you need. So I've got some white and some ginger. That's what I'm using, and also a little piece of brown for the eyes. But this is about all you'd need for the whole project. In fact, it's probably way more than you'll need. The cat's very tiny. Then once we've done the cat, we'll be making a little rug. So for that, I have a piece of felt that I'm going to cut into a circle, and then here we've got some yarn. So you'll need 3 pieces. I said about 20 centimeters long, 25 centimeters. I'm not sure what that is in inches. I'm sorry. So yes, you will see in the video that we make a knot and make a braid all the way down, and then that's what we use to make the pattern on the rug. So I did get the idea for the rug from another video, so I'll link that down below because that was really helpful. I really wasn't sure where to start with that, so that one's down below if you want to have a look at their video. One last thing, the other video that I have linked down below is the very first thing that I made with needle felting, which was a baby Yoda. And you may not be interested in making a baby Yoda, but it was a really fun project, and I followed a video that was amazing. It was so detailed and so helpful, and really helped me get my head around how to do needle felting. Still by no means an expert, I'm still very much a learner, but this video, if you want to see it down below, it was really good. So yes, without any further ado, let's start making our little tiny cat.
Okay, so I'm starting off with my wool roving. I'm making an orange and white cat. So I've just pulled off 2 tufts of the roving, and I'm making it about the size the cat will be, but bigger, because when you're stabbing at it and forming it, it will get a bit smaller. So here I am, just shaping it and pulling it out together, kind of mixing it up. You honestly can't go too far wrong because you can always change it anyway. But just kind of like rolling it together into a ball in whatever looks good for you. And once you've got it all curled up into a little ball, start stabbing at it with your needle. However, you'll see here that I've stopped to get my handy little finger glove. This little glove is quite amazing. It has stopped many injuries, because when I first started needle felting, I did stab myself in the finger quite a number of times. It's very painful. So I've sped up the video because really it's a lot of stabbing at the wool to form it into the shape that you want. I will use this opportunity to say the reason I've chosen the orange and white cat, I know that normally a witch would have a black cat, of course, but for some reason the cat I have in mind, it's from a Disney movie, quite an old one. I think it was a a Disney one from, I'm guessing maybe like the 1960s or 70s. It was called Thomasina. Does anyone else remember this movie? I feel like in the movie, the cat belonged to a witch. And this is what comes to my mind when I think of this cat sitting in my little witch's cottage. So I'm just continuing to stab away. It does take quite a while, but it's quite enjoyable too. Now that we've got our little ball that will be the cat's body, I'm now shaping it to have a little indent along the side. So if you imagine a cat's body curled up by the fire and its tail wrapped around the bottom of its body, that's sort of what I'm shaping here. So I'm just making a little line and then poking the needle in over and over again into that line, and it starts to form the shape of the tail wrapped around the body. And then you can go along the sides too and neaten that up a little bit. Putting the body aside now, I'm making the 2 front paws for the cat. So just getting 2 small balls of the roving, again, a bit of a mixture of the white and the ginger. So the paws are very tiny, so a bit tricky to make. I also found that I couldn't use my little glove here, which was very dicey. I did manage to not stab myself, but please do be careful when you're doing this stage. It's basically about folding it over as small as you can and then stabbing at it to make the shape. Rubbing it like this does help a lot. It agitates the fibres and rubs them together, but you still need to stab it a little bit to get the shape to hold. But here we go. I'm going to attach it to the body now. And again, that's just about stabbing the fibres again so that that little leg can attach. Now we've got those front 2 little legs on, it's time to work on the cat's head. So again, taking some white and orange roving and folding it over, and this time we're going to try and make it into a little ball. So just keep on rolling it and turning it until it's about the size that you think is right. And then again with the stabbing, and again found that the smaller the pieces get, it's hard to use the glove. So just being very careful here. Now moving on to the cat's little ears, which are even tinier. So this was slightly easier because we're shaping them into a point at the top of the ears. So when you twist the roving, it kind of forms the shape naturally. This stage of attaching the ears to the cat's head was quite tricky, partly just because it is so tiny, and trying to keep the shape of the cat's head without changing it too much, while also making sure the ears are attached and they're in the right place. So this did take a bit of time of just fiddling around with it. So if you find that it's just seeming like it's not coming together, don't be alarmed. Oh yes, and here I'm trimming some of the little fuzzy bits off because I was finding it difficult to really get in there. But eventually I had my little cat ears the way I wanted them. And here I'm just going to add a little nose for the cat. I didn't have any pale pink roving, so I just got a tiny piece of white and made it into a little ball and attached it to the cat's face. And I will paint that with some pale pink paint towards the end. It was a challenge to not poke this all the way into the cat's face and keep it raised, so I just did my best with it. So next up we're doing the cat's eyes, which I chose to do to make it look like the cat was sleeping. So I just wanted a dark colour to make a sort of little line as if the cat's eyes were closed. And this was pretty simple but fiddly, just rolling up very tiny pieces of dark coloured roving. I used a dark brown, and then shaping them evenly, but also in that kind of smiling cat's eyes kind of face. So now the face is mostly finished. I just wanted to add a little tiny bit of pink to the cat's nose. So I used the tiniest dot of pink paint on the nose and dabbed it on there, and then used the other end of the toothpick to sort of spread it around and make it look as natural as I could. Now for the big moment of attaching the cat's head to the body. This was probably the easiest part of the whole process. So really holding the face gently and doing a few stabs to attach the head, and then just feeling around to see where it needs to be held a little bit more securely. Now I wanted to add a few more features to the cat that I couldn't do with felt, so I just used a really fine tip black pen to add some shading in where the cat's mouth and the lines on its face would be. It just kind of gave it a bit more of an expression. The last stage for the cat is really just going over it and trying to neaten up any fluffy bits, but then of course going in with the scissors, because that way you can just trim off any excess pieces. I'm now moving on to making the little rug that the cat's going to sit on. For this one, I followed a tutorial I found on YouTube by the Denver Museum of Miniature Dolls and Toys. I'll link it down below. It was very simple and very helpful because there are a few different ways you can do this. So to start with, I'm just drawing a circle around a little circular shaped stencil I've got. And the only tip I'd say here is that I'm using pure wool felt, which makes it easier a bit later on when it comes time to attach the braiding to the felt. Next, we're doing the braiding that will form the pattern on the base of the wool felt. Again, I'm using yarn that has quite a high percentage of wool, and that just helps it to attach to the wool felt. You don't have to, you can just glue it down. That was just what I chose to do. So just take 3 pieces of yarn, roughly about 30 centimeters long. I reckon mine were a bit too long, but that's how I started. Tied a knot in the top and then just started braiding them. I kept on going until it was around 20 centimeters, but you can just gauge it depending how big your circle is. One thing I will say is that I think the yarn I used was a bit too thick, so I would have used a smaller ply or maybe even a cotton type material instead of using yarn. I might try that in a future project. So once you've braided it roughly long enough and you've checked it against the size of your rug, mine was very small, only probably 2 centimeters in diameter, so I didn't need much at all. So once I had the right length, I tied a knot in the bottom and then snipped off the extra thread. Next here you'll see I'm adding a dab of glue into the middle of the rug so that I can stick down that first section and make that quite secure. And once that felt like it was holding together in the centre, I just used some more glue to go around the other sides of it. And then I could do the process of twirling it around. So kind of like in a snail pattern, just twisting it around to make a spiral all the way to the edge of the rug. To do this part, you have to press down quite firmly on the spiral while you're making the right shape. So I'm sorry, it does mean my hands are covering it up. If I'd moved them away, it wouldn't have held into place. So hopefully you can get the idea from seeing what I'm doing. And the glue was holding it together pretty well, but I felt like I didn't want to use tons and tons of glue, so I just needle felted at the end. And this worked because the yarn was, it's not pure wool, but it's got quite a high percentage of wool, and the felt underneath it is pure wool. So that just helped to kind of bind it together and make it look a bit more natural. I added a little bit more glue at the sides just to make sure it was held together very securely. To finish off the tail, I cut it short and tried to needle felt it in, but it did actually work better to just cut it quite short. Just giving the rug a little trim to neaten it up before we attach the cat. And finally, here we go. We can attach the little cat to the rug. So I've got out my felting foam again and just going to do a few little stabs to make sure that the cat is attached to the rug. You don't really have to attach it, but I kind of like the way it sat a bit more neatly when I made sure some of the pieces were actually held down. And here it is, the little cat sitting on its rug. I can't wait to see how she looks in my little witch's cottage.
So here she is, my little completed cat. I'm pretty happy with her. As with lots of different crafty things, but especially with needle felting, I find there's always things you could do to make it just a bit more perfect, but I'm pretty happy with how she's turned out. So that's it for this week. I do hope you'll join me next week. I'll be working on making a book of shadows for my little witchy lounge room. So I hope you can join me for that. Thanks very much. Bye.